Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Politics Relaxed. It's very nice to be back after summer, and Parliament is also back after summer. Just one day in, and we're already full of drama. We're going to be talking today about two of those big issues that have already come up. First of all, the schools crisis with this faulty concrete that's been used, and is now loads of schools have had to close temporarily, and also the Labour reshuffle that took place today. So we'll be discussing all of that in today's episode. Let's get straight into it. We'll start with this schools crisis.
Well, I think on the post-interview statement, it's just blowing it out of complete proportion. Who really cares? I mean, like, it's such a small thing for anyone to be bringing it up as a massive issue. Should reconsider. And it's literally just something I said post-interview that's not that big at all.
I I disagree with you slightly on that because I think if you look at what she said, she was very much trying to shift the blame from away from herself and anyone else in the department and trying to blame it on any other person she could other than herself. And I think that is a big issue because somebody needs to be held account for what has happened, and the education department and for the Conservatives as a whole have a massive part to play in this. And this is what happens when you have 10 or 13 years now, sorry, of an austerity government. You have 13 years of a government that doesn't properly fund things. What do you get? You get situations like that. It's a perfect metaphor for the Conservative Party over the last 13 years. Broken.
I mean, if you're looking at what we're seeing now, is action. I mean, this is exactly what we want to see. Decisive action on this concrete, and both Jeremy Hunt and Gillian Keegan said that we will do whatever it takes. I
Is
don't
that
think
action?
we
Is
would
that
want any more. What more do you want?
that action is because of their neglect? They've
Yeah.
pushed this back and back and back and back, and now they have to do something now. And they've let the 1,700 schools being closed the week before. They've made their own mess. They've kicked this further and further down the path, and they haven't addressed it. Michael Gove clearly cut school funding, so they're less able to deal with these issues, and therefore, a week before term starts, they've got this mess that they've got to take action over because there's 1,700 schools that are going to be shut.
Of course, I don't think we should go into the reasons for austerity, as would be here all day. But I still believe that in what I said before, we have a problem. We've seen that problem now, and we're doing what we can to fix it.
But there's a like a simple missing of the facts here, which is it's taken years and years and years, despite everybody knowing this was a problem, despite people writing to education secretary. I mean, the fact that we've had five education secretaries in what how many years is a massive part to play in this because you have a government, or you have, I mean, yeah, a government, but a department that's not had a direction for years because basically of Tory incompetence and chaos. And then you have a problem which has been coming down the line for years and years and years. And then somehow, days before school starts, as like thousands, probably hundreds, or definitely hundreds, maybe thousands of kids are now being affected by this, and some of them aren't going to be able to go to school. And then you come here and say, "What an amazing job we've done." No, there's a whole backstory to that that you seem to have just missed when you make that point.
Look back at the real backstory because you can talk about the backstory in the context of the last 13 years, but there's a history that goes back much longer than that. RAC wasn't installed by the Conservative government in the last 20 or so, or in the last 13 years. It wasn't installed by the Blair government before that. It was installed in the 1950s, the 1960s, and 1970s, by a whole variety of governments who wanted to cut costs in the aftermath of the Second World War. And frankly, the governments from those periods of time, including the terrible Labour governments of the 1960s and 70s, but the overarching point is basically that, all governments in the last few decades and in the next few decades are going to have to deal with the consequences of the failures of governments in the past. We have a government here who are having to react pragmatically and deal with the consequences of governments of the past. And, I think that they're very brave to do this because other governments in the past, including Labour and Conservative ones, have clearly delayed this issue because they don't want the negative publicity that comes with even talking about the issue in the first place. So I think that actually the current government have showed a lot of courage to come out and say, we've got a big problem here. The schools haven't been paying paying attention to it. They've been ignoring the questionnaires or whatever. You know, the regulating bodies haven't been doing their jobs. We've got to step in now from a macro perspective. We've got to deal with it. We've got to deal with removing the RAC. And look, we're going to have to take the call. It's a massive call. It's going to have a big impact on schools and children. And the bottom line is that, you know, we've all been to schools. We know how important they are. And we know how missing schools can have a big impact for any period of time. But there has to be something done about it. So the government are showing a lot of courage in going about that. I think Gillian Keegan's actually doing a very good job under really difficult circumstances. I can understand the amount of pressure and the amount of sleep that she must have lost as a result of this little period. So I can understand why she might come out after an interview when she doesn't think that she's on the record and lose her temper a little bit. I think it's very understandable. And actually, I think it was great to see a politician showing an emotion in the way that she did, not only because she was tackling an interviewer who was asking unfair questions, but also because she showed the emotion to empathise with people who are in the situation where this is impacting them. You know, she showed that she knows children, she has children or whatever.
She showed that she knows children. I mean, what a fantastic education minister we've got. You're really selling it to us. Oh, I mean,
you've got to give them some respect, all right? They're really working under difficult circumstances, and they're doing whatever they can.
Look, there's some serious, kind of missing pieces in this puzzle, in this story that you are trying to tell, and that the Tory party have tried to tell and tried to rewrite the narrative over this, which is, it's all Labour's fault. It's government from 13 years ago that should have dealt with this. But then you listen to what's actually going on. You listen to the senior civil servant that came out earlier and said that the Conservative ministers were dangerously complacent on this issue. You listen to the fact that Rishi Sunak halved schools. You listen to the fact that Rishi Sunak halved schools budgets. There is serious incompetence going on in this government, and there has been for many, many years. It's the same route. It's austerity and it's incompetence, and that's what we've seen over the last few years with this Conservative government. And why is it a surprise when you have a failing NHS, when you have buildings that are on the verge of collapse, you have people missing schools because of this? It is because of a dangerously incompetent government. That's the direct words of a civil servant. That's the reason we're in this mess. It's not because of some ridiculous government that was 15, 20 years ago. I mean, sure, you can blame them for putting the RAC in the first place, and you can blame the fact that we don't build public buildings to a good safety standard, and sure, that's a valid point, but the government itself has also failed in this issue, and it has to take some accountability for that.
Can I just start by giving Gillian Keegan a special thank you for reaching the 6-month mark in the job as Education Secretary? Because I think it's very telling when you've had 5 education secretaries last year. There was a teacher who was speaking to me about this issue, and they said if you had 5 headmasters at a school in the same academic year, that school would be in special measures very, very quickly. The fact that the Department of Education hasn't had a sense of direction is very telling. If you look at the Defence Department, Ben Wallace has been there for 4 years straight, and now they're just having a reshuffle now. This would never happen in Defence. You would never get 5 Secretaries of State within the same year. This would only happen in education because it just stands to where the government puts education in terms of its priority list. It's nowhere near the top. So when we can blame Labour and all of this kind of stuff about not being radical enough, it's nice to see at least that Labour have put education in the top 5 priorities, because it's nice to hear that they're actually considering it. The Conservative Party have been unbelievably inept with this issue. If you look at the Gordon Brown manifesto of 2010, he had a plan to build back better with schools and to reinstill these schools, modernise them, and also potentially rebuild them all by 2020. Michael Gove came in with a fantastic idea in 2010 to push that down the line, because we haven't got the money to do that. So as a result of that incompetence and that specific decision in 2010, these schools are the way they are, and it's the timing of it. This could have been challenged way before parliamentary recess. It's happened a week before school starts. Could they have picked a worse time for this to happen?
I just think you talk about the government's incompetence, and I just think what they're doing right now is a very sound example of competence. You know, you can talk about past governments, you can talk about 5 education secretaries in 2022 or whatever. You know, you've got to remember that 3 of them did come in 3 days, so it's not really, it doesn't make that much of an impact to the overall direction of the department. Well, I just don't. You have to judge the actual impact, and there hasn't been that much when it comes to the changing of education secretaries. I wouldn't say, and look, from my perspective, you've got to wonder about all the other people around who are now talking about this. My opinion is that the civil servants, maybe the schools who have been a bit anonymous on tackling these issues, are now the ones complaining and trying to sabotage the government to try and, I think, to cover up for their own failings and their own faults. Because the government are always the first people to blame, but they can't control everything. They work on a very macro level over the entirety of the issues of the country. They can't control every little bit of concrete in a school. There has to be a little bit more responsibility taken by the people who are actually dealing with that in everyday life.
I mean, this is coming from a government that have devalued teachers, that haven't paid teachers properly, that have completely basically spat in their faces for the incredible. No, it's not you, but I mean, you're giving the same lines that the government do, and it comes from it comes from a government that have done that. And then you're like, oh no, look at the teachers. This is all the teachers' fault. And you say the 5 education.
I'm not saying it's the teachers' fault.
You say the 5 education secretaries haven't made a difference. I mean, you look at what tests have said, you look at anybody in the education sector, all of them point to that. All of them point to the fact that there have been 5 education secretaries in that, I don't know the exact period, a year or something like that. I don't know off the top of my head. But that short turnover of education secretaries has been disastrous for the way that department has been run. And even before that, there was a quick turnover of education secretaries. It's the same with children's ministers and things like that. We've seen it in pretty much every department because of Tory infighting, and now you're seeing the results of that. Let's move on to the other news of today, which was Keir Starmer's reshuffle.
It's not as bad as I expected it to be. I thought there would be an absolute purge of the left in respect of Angela Rayner being demoted. I thought there would be a lot of key people who dropped out. Thankfully, he's kind of retained Angela Rayner, actually given her a promotion. He's changed culture in the House of Commons, which, to be fair, I think if you would ask the members of the public which they really value the most, I think they'll be very, very near the bottom, the House of Commons and culture. I mean, there's been some positive people coming back in, though. Even in that kind of left caucus of the party, there's been Hilary Benn come back into the Northern Ireland Secretary of State position, which would be quite a nice addition. It keeps that kind of balance of power quite nice. But there's been some quite impressive ministers who have been demoted, like Lisa Nandy specifically. She was very impressive with what she was saying with housing. I'm not sure whether Keir Starmer wanted a safe pair of hands with Lisa Nandy to then give Angela Rayner that ability to go and implement what she's trying to do. I mean, it's quite nice to see that he hasn't completely purged the left. It's quite important that he's kept the 4 main secretaries of state the same. Obviously, the ones that he's had the missions with, they haven't changed. So that's quite consistent with what he's trying to do for government. But yeah, I think it's pretty clear from the shadow cabinet, Labour is the government in waiting and the Conservative Party are the opposition in waiting.
I so far disagree with that last comment. I can't even begin to say. The ministers that I see in the shadow cabinet just seem like such lightweights compared to what we've got currently, in my opinion, and what we've had in the last 13 years. No matter what the policies have been from the Conservative government. I look at Angela Rayner and, obviously, you say she's received a promotion. I mean, in terms of the political ideology of her, I think the only reason that she's still in the shadow cabinet is because she can't be removed because she's been elected by the party to be there, of course. And I think that if Starmer had the choice, then he probably would have got rid of her because, frankly, she's an intellectual lightweight. And I think she's going to really, really, really struggle in those matchups against Michael Gove in the House of Commons. I think that Lisa Nandy has been demoted because she is actually she's a moral. She's a moral.
Why did you say it like that?
She's a moral lightweight.
No.
Her is basically when you look. Because listen, she's decided that she's going to bend over to Keir Starmer's wishes to take a lower position rather than stand up for what her actual career is, what she believes she should be fighting for. And I think that's deeply concerning from a potential minister. Who goes from being the shadow foreign secretary to being the shadow international development secretary in the space of 2 years? I think it's really embarrassing for her. I'm surprised because I think that she's an intellectually stronger shadow minister on Labour's side. But I'm very disappointed that she's failed to stand up to Sir Keir Starmer in the way that he's sort of bullied her out of those more important positions and influential positions in the shadow cabinet.
I want to talk about the Lisa Nandy and Angela Rayner swap. I'm also quite disappointed by it, to be honest. I don't think it was the right decision because I think Angela Rayner in the role she was holding was doing a pretty good job. You listen to what the unions were saying about her work in the future for work plan that she put together, and they were very positive about that. I know they've taken her official role away, but she's still leading on it. So I don't exactly know what that'll look like. I guess we'll find out in time. But I thought Lisa Nandy was doing a really, really stellar job at housing. She put forward a very strong vision, and I think she should have been the one for the next election to carry that brief onwards, unfortunately. I think she's a very, very strong communicator, and I think you look at her compared to Angela Rayner, and Angela Rayner definitely has her strengths, especially when it comes to attacking the Tories, but I think what Lisa Nandy has is a strong sense of communication, and I think she's more popular than Angela Rayner. In certain parts of the country, I think Lisa Nandy will come across much better to people than Angela Rayner will. So I just don't understand it as a move, because Angela Rayner was already at the forefront of Labour. So why would you take away Lisa Nandy and put her to kind of the lower down positions where she's not going to get as much airtime, and then bring Angela Rayner into this new position when she was already at the forefront of the party and doing a good job at what she does best, which is attacking the Tories? It didn't make sense to me. And I'm left kind of more confused than ever with where the Labour Party is going. I still think there's a good chance. I mean, Labour are going to win the next election, no doubt about it. But it's whether we can carry forward a good vision into 2024, which is what I still haven't seen yet. And I'm waiting to see that from Keir Starmer. And that's my worry. And this reshuffle, again, it represents kind of this muddled approach that he has, and one that doesn't make sense. He's relegated some very strong, competent ministers, and that doesn't make much sense to me.
Has he also not relegated competition for when he eventually does resign? Because he wants to keep people who are relatively competent pretty down the pecking order. So Lisa Nandy's relatively decent, and she was in the leadership role last time, and she was relatively popular. Although she didn't win, she did make some valid points, and a lot of the electorate thought at least she was a clean break from Jeremy Corbyn. So he's relegated competition in that case, hasn't he, surely?
Yeah. I mean, he's been briefing against Lisa Nandy for months. So I think that could be a way of explaining some of these decisions, at least.
What I find so confusing about it is I look at the changes in the shadow cabinet, and I see that he, from a poor starting point, which the shadow cabinet was before, as I said, he's made it worse by demoting the best communicators. So when you're going into a general election campaign and when you need to best employ the people who can really get across to the public, whether that be Lisa Nandy, given her background and the region where she's from, or given, say, Jonathan Ashworth and how competently he's able to speak, as well as, the fact that he's from the West Midlands area, you're losing people who can really communicate with people, and who even I, as a Conservative supporter, would watch and think, okay, yeah, these two aren't that bad. So I was really surprised by those two losing their jobs.
I totally
Just
agree.
moving on from Lisa Nandy really quickly, there's been one really important thing that's happened in the shadow cabinet that I'm not sure many people have really heard about because of the different rotations. That Dr. Rosina Khan's resigned because Keir Starmer doesn't see a mental health portfolio being central to the next general election. It's very strange.
I mean, I think Lisa Nandy was disappointing. I think John Ashworth was disappointing, the fact that they both got demoted, but that was the thing that worried me most. I think Rosina Allen Khan is one of the strongest people that was in that room. I think she was doing what Wes Streeting wasn't, which is understanding what doctors, nurses, and people within the NHS feel. And I really worry for healthcare policy within the Labour Party, an area which they should be dominating after the failures of the last 13 years. There is a huge, huge issue within the NHS, an issue which Labour have not yet stepped up to the plate on. Wes Streeting, he doesn't understand the brief. He shouldn't be there. I was somebody that was calling for Rosina Allen Khan to get a promotion into that role. I can't believe that he's let her go. Such a talent. somebody that really understands politics, is really in it for the right reasons, and he's accepted her leaving the shadow cabinet. That is a complete dereliction of duty from Keir Starmer, and it's something again that really worries me for the next election. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's something that really, really surprised me as well, because again, I thought that she was one of the stronger talents in a bad bunch, if you like. I thought she was going to be heading to the top, with relative efficiency. So I was quite shocked to see that she had gone. And I find it particularly shocking, given that we have a mental health minister in government, and the government have appointed a mental health advisor from outside. So this is clearly something that the government are focused on. My question would be, why aren't Labour as well? When you're going into a general election campaign where Labour is supposed to be standing up for young people, and mental health is such a big issue for young people, then shouldn't Labour take that responsibility a little bit?
Yeah.
I just don't understand who Keir Starmer's trying to impress or trying to please with getting rid of a mental health brief. I think that's bonkers.
My understanding is that they're going to have somebody go into mental health, but it's just no longer attending cabinet, is my understanding of what he's done. So, I mean, I hope that there's somebody that's still at least going to stand up for mental health within Parliament for Labour. I hope so. I mean, that would be very strange. But again, it's just one of those moves that doesn't really make sense. And I think I really worry about whoever, I mean, first of all, Keir Starmer's own judgment on this, but also who's advising Keir Starmer. And I just think there is a real lack of, I don't know, direction from the top of the Labour Party. I don't quite understand what they're doing. I mean, they brought in a load of people who, again, I mean, nobody's, if you look at most of the appointments, nobody's going to bat an eyelid. Nobody who's not deeply following politics is really going to care. But you look at what this means for certain policy areas, and there are some real question marks over it. All right, with that, I think we should wrap up. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. As always, thank you to you for watching the video. Like and subscribe, and we'll see you very soon.